You're listening to the God Life Culture Podcast, where faith
and what's trending collide. Welcome to the latest episode of the God Life Culture Podcast. This is Eddie.
What's up, everyone? This is Miguel, and we are so thankful that you are tuned in for another episode of the God Life Culture Podcast. If this is your first time listening, welcome to our podcast. We hope that you enjoyed today's conversation and that you subscribe so you could be notified every time we drop a new episode. If this is not your first time and you are a returning listener coming back week after week, we just want to say welcome back and thank you for choosing to listen to our podcast. We are officially right in the middle of summer.
Yes.
And hopefully everyone is out there enjoying the summer weather, enjoying all the summer activities. School is out, right? And we just have a lot to enjoy, right?
Yeah, basically.
This summer. So it's a good time.
Yeah, it's a good time. It's this time of year where I think technically everybody's out of school already. I know some states get out in May, other states get out in June, and it's now it's all the summer camps and the summer programs and all of that stuff happening. And everybody just trying to enjoy the best of it as they can. I think that's the point. So there's some people that may be listening to this on their way to work. Other people are listening to this on their way to drop their kid off at summer camp.
On the way to the pool.
Other people on their way to pool, beach, or whatever. So I think it's all fun stuff where we just try to take advantage of this time, of the good weather when you live in states that doesn't have summer all year long.
Yeah.
So it's just all good stuff.
Yeah. And recently I've been reading this book by T.D. Jakes called Disruptive Thinking. And my dad actually went to the International Leaders Summit conference that he does every year. And it was in Florida. And this was kind of the book that he was promoting and pushing, his most recent book. And he picked it up for me. I started reading it. And first, the title caught my attention, right? Disruptive Thinking, because I feel like that word disruptive is usually used in a negative light, right? When you hear, don't be a disruption, or you're being disruptive, or as a teacher, I think looking at this through the teacher lens, disruptions aren't a good thing, right? Or when a student is being disruptive in class, it's not a good thing. But he, I guess, challenges that idea and challenges that thought of, that word disruptive and what it means. And he talks about being a disruptive thinker, being that person that is willing to stand up and be bold and cause change to happen.
Yeah. In
whatever context, whether it's a community, whether it's your church, whether it's your ministry, an organization, your business, your family, wherever you have, again, that sphere of influence in your life, being ready and willing and bold enough to stand up, to go against maybe what others are saying, right? When the truth, or I guess you could say a different and wiser solution, right? A better solution, being bold enough to kind of take those stands in your life to cause positive change. So I don't know, when you think of disruptive thinker, when you think of that word disruptive in this context, what comes to mind?
I think what comes to mind is the individuals who think outside of the box while looking at the full picture. I think of individuals who at times are in the midst of working in projects or in groups of people who seem to be doing the same thing over and over and getting the same results, which usually are not the best results. And then they kind of find themselves in a position of awkwardness, having to be the individual to be like, hey, why are we doing this like this?
Yeah.
Or why don't we try this other thing? And I think that the description of it being disruptive thinkers is very accurate because I've been in situations like that where it literally does feel like you're being this troublemaker who is giving an idea or is giving a suggestion that could work, but everyone is looking at you like, why are you trying to change stuff?
Yeah.
Why are you trying to mess things up or whatever? So I think that for people that will fall under the category of a disruptive, I can't even say the word, thinker, I think that it's a great thing. It's a great asset to have. It's a great skill and ability and a gift, all the great things that you want to categorize it as, but it can also be a frustrating place to live in mentally.
Yeah, I agree. I think, one of the reasons why I kind of related to the book and I was like, this is something I want to pick up and read is because I sometimes consider myself to be a disruptive thinker as well, right? Or the individual that, in certain contexts will say something that may challenge kind of the normal way of doing things, right? And you kind of bring an innovative way or a different perspective on how to handle something, on how to go about something. And like you said, a lot of times when you go against kind of what's already being done and established and the routine and the normalcy of things, but you see that those things may not be producing results or may not be as effective, and you have a different resource or a different tool or a different way where, listen, we can take this and it could become this, we just have to do these different things or this step, or you bring an idea to the table. Sometimes, again, it does cause that disruption. It does cause for people to look at you a little crazy or look at you as to, why do you want to change things? Like, why can't we just leave it like this? And a lot of times, it may not always be in a negative light that people look at you in that way, but they may also look at you in the sense of, okay, but how do we do that? I don't know how to do that, right? Where it's almost like your idea, your thought, your thinking is just foreign, where sometimes people can't relate to it or people can't see that full picture, right? And I think the disruptive thinker comes with a heavy burden. It comes with a heavy responsibility to be in rooms and in spaces where you are the one that's going to shift people's mindset or people's thought on something, and that's not always easy to do.
Yes.
And it's not always easy to do, especially when you are doing it with individuals that are close to you, right? Or are your friends or are your family, right? A lot of times this is a thing even within family, right? Where your family has a way of doing certain things and you kind of question, like, why do we do it that way? Why is it done, in that manner? I think maybe we should try doing it this way. Yeah. And then you start a family and then you're now trying to shift things or change things around, right? That maybe before your family did differently. And now here you come in and you're changing that. That can be disruptive, right? And a lot of times people, I think, don't know how to handle disruption or disruptive thinking. They don't know how to handle someone coming in with a different idea, sometimes a better idea or a different perspective on something. And I think, that's where people get defensive, where people begin to question or complain. And, one of the things he talks about in the book is the idea of disruptive thinking and thinkers. I'm going to read it so I don't mess it up. He says, you can't be a disruptive thinker while trying to negotiate peace settlements with people who want to define you by their description of you. Right? So he basically goes on in talking about you have to make a decision to prioritize, okay, this is what these people are saying about me. This is their description about me, but I'm not going to let that affect what I'm bringing to the table or the steps that I'm going to take. It may be disruptive and they may look at me as, a quiet individual. They may look at me as just a teacher. They may look at me as just a musician. They may look at me as, just someone who is good at business. And here I am kind of, giving my input on something that may be different from their perception or description of me, right? And I think oftentimes that can be very threatening, right? Where you have to really make a choice to be like, okay, I know this is how I am viewed, but I'm still going to go forth with this and be bold about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that as well. I think that they're just, it's a lot, because you have the individuals who come off as outspoken and bold and brash and, they're disruptive thinkers and all that other stuff. Then you have other people which can sometimes fall on the other side of the spectrum, like you were saying, which are, they're usually more observant, more quiet, only say things when they need to say them. And then when they do say stuff, it kind of causes these waves to happen. And I think that, over time, you learn to develop a skill. There has to be a grace with how you deliver these opinions, thoughts, suggestions, observations. And I think that especially for, I've always been in circles of people where I'm always the youngest. I'm always the youngest person. So then whether it's at work or in leadership teams or wherever, and, sometimes the idea of being the young person in the room in itself is already intimidating thing. And then when you are looking at all these people that have more experience than you, have more age than you, and then you're thinking about something that for some reason is not clicking for them, and then you try to vocalize that, you also, at least for me, I always try to take into consideration people's feelings.
Yeah.
You know, and I know that we shouldn't be worried about what people think of you and this and that or whatever, but unless you are the person running the group, unless you are the person who is the CEO, unless you're the whoever, you know, you do have to take into consideration other people's feelings,
absolutely,
because you want them to work in alignment with you. So it doesn't make any sense for you to be this disruptive thinker who has all these creative out of the box and what you consider to be obvious observations, but then your delivery on what you want those things to be is so unprofessional or gross or blunt that people are just like bothered by what you have to say. Because I've been in circles with people who I would consider to be a disruptive thinker, but they haven't polished that skill yet. So every time they talk and every time they suggest something and every time they notice an observation, it comes off in such a bad way that the message gets completely distorted. So then instead of being a situation where you're addressing a person based off of the idea or the observation that they threw on the table, you're addressing them on their delivery. You know, so I think that as a disruptive thinker, or if you know people who are disruptive thinkers, you know, it's very important that the delivery on how it's basically, we talk about this with everything. You know, when you talk to somebody, you may be having the most honest thing to say, but if it's delivered the wrong way, it's gonna be received the wrong way as well. But you know, one of the things that I was thinking about was that sometimes because I mentioned earlier that there are frustrations when you're someone who operates in this realm, is when you are not the CEO. It's when you are not the person in charge, the manager, the supervisor, whatever, and you have to wait for the hierarchy to get on board. Because I think that there have been many a times where I've made a suggestion on something. I can think of like things at work as well, where I'm looking at how the system is operating. Me like, I think we need to change this or invest in this or whatever. And everybody's, you know, it takes them a while to acclimate to the idea, and you just have to sit there and wait. Sometimes you really just have to be like, and then 3 years later, and I've literally had this, years later, 3-4 years later, you know, the idea you mentioned 3 years ago, 4 years ago is all of a sudden a good idea that now everybody's on board to deal with. And unfortunately, sometimes, you know, as disruptive thinkers, you're planting seeds. You know, sometimes you're a bulldozer. And it's like, no, we're going to do this. We're going to change this. This has to get done, and it has to get done now. And other times you're planting seeds that takes time to flourish in people that have to make those decisions, you know, minds and hearts.
And I like that because I think there's two sides in looking at that, right? You put it nicely when you said you're planting seeds, right? That's more the positive, right, way of looking at that. Then I guess more of the other side, which I think for some people is, you know, harder to do, is the idea of that can be a flaw of the disruptive thinker. The disruptive thinker may have these ideas and may have these things that can be executed, and this can actually work, and this can be a great idea, right? But it's not the time to implement that. Me as a disruptive thinker, I would love, no, but I think it's going to work now. I think it's going to work great if we do this, if we do that. So I think that oftentimes people who are the disruptive thinkers may struggle with doing things too quick, right? Or making decisions too soon and executing plans that maybe you needed to sit back and wait just a little bit before going forth with that, you know? Yeah. And I think oftentimes that is the struggle as well, right? Where, like you said, you are not the one in charge, so you can't just make all these things happen, right? But then it's like, depending on where you are, if you're looking at this from a work perspective, right? You have to recognize, okay, I'm not the CEO. I'm not the one in charge. I'm just going to have to wait. And eventually, maybe, like you said, planting these seeds, eventually they'll see it and they'll move with the idea. But then within ministry circles, it's like the same thing where it's like, okay, I'm not, you know, the leader involved, or at the top, I'm not the pastor. I'm not the one, you know, that kind of is responsible or accountable for all these things. I have to now trust, which may be different in the business side, I have to now trust God, right? That God knows what he's doing, that God is giving that leader, that individual, vision and, authority and timing and all of those things, where then as a disruptive thinker, my trust and confidence needs to be put in God to know, okay, maybe it really isn't the time for this idea. Maybe it really isn't the time for me to start this.
Yeah.
Right. So I think disruptive thinkers are also very ambitious, and they have plans, they have ideas, and it's knowing, okay, when is it time to move forward with this? And when do I have to wait and take a minute to really think about how we're going to execute this?
Yeah.
And one of the things, that he mentioned in the book that you were talking about earlier is the idea that disruptive does not mean destructive. Right. So we can categorize certain people as disruptive, right, in a negative way. They are brash, they are out there, they interrupt, they are rude, all of those things. And we could say that, that's a disruption. When we talk about disruptive thinking and people that are willing to take a stand and cause change and be influential and give their ideas and input and all of those things for better results and more positive results, there are people that in the process of doing that are destructive, right? And destroy and hurt people in the process. And I think that is what we have to be careful with. We cannot, in the process of bringing our bright ideas and in the process of bringing all our effective ways on how to get something done, we are hurting everybody in the process, right? Especially when you are entering kind of other people's realms or other people's circles of influence, right? Where it's not necessarily your job. It's not necessarily what you are doing or what you're called to do in that moment, but you have great ideas and you have ideas for change and you have ideas for innovation. You have to be careful not to hurt the people that are in those circles.
Yeah.
And, you said it earlier, it's not about we can't hurt people's feelings, but in reality, you really can't hurt people's feelings. You know what I mean? It's like that thing where, people, they have emotions, they have feelings. There are people that can easily be hurt by some things. There are people that can easily be offended by some things. And there is a strategic and wise way on how to offer your disruptive thinking and how to offer those ideas. And I think, it's very different when people are hurt by what you're saying or offended because of ego or of pride, or because they can't accept the fact that, you're coming with a better idea than they had. That's different.
Yeah.
Right. But when you have that better idea, you have that smarter way on how to handle certain things, you just have to be careful not to offend while you get up there and on your way up.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of times too, I think a disruptive thinker can also be someone who just asks simple questions. It's not, I came up with this huge master plan on how to execute X, Y, and Z. Sometimes it's the question of being like, why do we do this like this?
Yeah.
Why is it that, I've been also, once again, in rooms with people who I'm like, why was this established? Or why is it that we're doing this way? Or why this or why that? And everybody's like, I don't know. That's just the way that we've always done it. And it's been a situation where they've never questioned the reason behind why certain traditions or why certain procedures are in place. It's just that, somebody thought about it like 30 years ago and whoever was in charge then thought it was a good idea. So we just maintain that. And it's like, yeah, but it's not working. So sometimes it's just a simple fact of being like, why? And then that'll trigger people to be like, you know what, that's true. And that causes the disruption that you need to happen for them people to start thinking outside of the box or to start thinking differently once they understand that there isn't a real reason why certain things are established the way that they are. It's not really benefiting, it's not really helping. So then why do we have to keep it? I think it's a good idea to then now move forward into like switching gears and changing it up.
Absolutely. One of the things that he mentions in the book sorry. He says, however, there are a few things we need to consider as we're about to land on that fresh new grass, which, new wave thinking. He says, the first, Lord, give me 1 second.
It's early.
The first, wow, there we go.
Yeah.
Welcome first back. Is that we need to come as a student, not as a teacher. That means we must pull back from our previous state and do some observation and introspection. Don't be marching in there giving orders before you know how the coffee machine works. So I like that idea because I think a lot of times, a negative or a flaw to a disruptive thinker is the idea of I'm going to go in there and I'm going to, cause change.
Yes.
And I'm going to go in there and I'm going to show them the right way to do things. And I'm going to go. And you walk in there and you don't know the space you're in.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know how things work,
Mm-hmm.
right? You don't know the protocol. You don't know the procedures. So I think if you're going to be a disruptive thinker, it is going to take a work on your end on how to do that effectively, right? If you are going in with all of these ideas, do you know what's already in place? Do you know what's already established, right? In that organization, in that ministry, in that church? You have to come prepared. And I think a lot of times, like I said earlier, disruptive thinkers just can move on the go and can just go into these situations. And it's like, but do you realize that that doesn't work because we only have this many people within our community right now. So what you're thinking requires a team that we don't have at this moment, Okay, that's true. So it's like, do you have a plan on how to get a team here? Do you have a plan on how to get more people here? If not, do you have a plan on how to work with the people we have right now? So I think oftentimes we just have to be careful not to step into these places and spaces and giving all of our ideas and input, and we don't know how the things work. We don't know, the statistics. We don't know the, I guess you could say, the demographic or the information on the people, the amount of people, the ideas, the protocol before we step in there and start making adjustments.
Yeah. No, I agree with that 100%. And I personally see that a lot in church leadership. When you have individuals who come into a position and they think they're going to be, this saving grace of like, oh, I'm going to come in and I'm going to turn everything on its head and switch it over. And then it's like, yeah, but you have no idea how anything works.
Yeah.
So we have that. And I also think, recently I experienced something very similar to that where I'm on a bunch of different boards and stuff like that. And somebody called me in reference to one of the boards I'm on. And I'm like, but do you not realize that we are limited with our current resources? So it's kind of like the idea of, I understand where you're coming from. And I think that, once our resources were different, then absolutely that's something that we can consider. But at the moment, there's no need to speak in that way or to have that thought in your mind when you yourself are very aware of our current restrictions, and then when things like that happen, that's what I call someone who doesn't have the grace yet to really like understand certain things, because it's like you understand everything that's going on, but you still want to complain about it, and you still want to be like, because other people may have something to say about that also, and it's like, who? Nobody, right? Nobody saying nothing about that, but I understand because there is a genuine concern. So the issue is that there's a genuine concern. But even though you know all the information, you're complaining about it because you want a change to happen. But you also know that we're currently restricted because we don't have the resources in place at the moment. Eventually, when we get to a place where we have the resources, then we can definitely do the change. Why complain about it now? Why cause those negative waves and ripple effects to happen? Because then you start speaking to other people about it, and then they start jumping on that bandwagon. Because that's the other thing. You have people that have certain influences to also deposit seeds, and they're like seeds of doubt or seeds of confusion or seeds of like contienda. I don't know how you say that in English.
Conflict.
Of conflict. And it's kind of like, use your talents for good. Use your talent with wisdom. There's certain observations that you will see, but you also have to be mindful to understand, you know what? But there's no way to fix it. We can't at the moment. We don't have the resources to do it. So we're going to have to put a pause on that or put a break on that. And then once the pool opens up where we do have the resources, it's kind of like, oh, okay, by the way, I've been thinking for the last, 6 months, that we can do something. And then now that we have the resources to do it, what do you guys think?
Yeah. And it's the idea of, you have to be prepared. You have to be prepared and come to the table, not only with all of, I guess you could say, those complaints, right? But you have to come with solutions.
Yeah.
Disruptive thinkers not only recognize problems and recognize what's wrong with a situation, they also come to the table with solutions.
Yeah.
And I guess that's where you can see the difference between a disruption, right? And someone who is just, bringing about that disruptive thinking, right? Where a disruption, it doesn't make sense. A disruption is, okay, but do you realize that if we did that, this is what's going to happen?
Yeah.
You didn't think your plan all the way through. Well, then a disruptive thinker or this innovative thinker comes knowing these are some of the setbacks we may face. These are some of the ways we can counteract that? And these are some of the ways we can address those problems, you know? One of the things he talks about in the book as well, in Disruptive Thinking, is disruptors also must be prepared for criticism, attack, and condemnation, especially in a society where we often seem to be more interested in canceling than in understanding. Criticism isn't a crisis, and sometimes criticism can be constructive. If it's not, if it's destructive, we must have the discipline and focus to ignore it. So he goes then, which I thought was really interesting, to discuss the difference between constructive and destructive. And he says, for one, we can ask a simple question: is it true? Is there any element of truth in the criticism? If the person doesn't know what you're talking about, if they're misrepresenting you, and you don't even know you can't let their opinions become your reality. And then he goes on and basically mentions the next thing. He says the question of energy. He says the energy in the next room is not the same as the energy in the room we left. We have to figure out the new pace. It may require speeding up or maybe slowing down. So you need to kind of discern, okay, is this true, what's being said? Or is this criticism, is this thought that you're bringing in, is it true? Right? And I think that is probably one of the hardest things to do, because immediately when someone comes at you with criticism or they come at you with these thoughts and ideas, immediately you want to defend yourself. Yeah. Natural. It's human, right? Well, this is why it's being done that way. This is why I'm doing that. This is why we're all like that. But you really have to take a step back and think about, okay, but is this true? Is what you're saying facts? Is it reality? And I think that is really where then, if you're honest with yourself and you're okay with that, you will realize, okay, that's not true. That's not why it's being done, or that's not what's happening. Or you may be on the other side where you realize, you know what, that criticism you're bringing to me is actually not destructive. It's constructive, you know, because what you're saying is true. And then a lot of times I think this will just cause a conversation, if it's done correctly, where you can have a conversation with that person and explain, okay, tell me what you see, and tell me, you know, what are some ideas or solutions you have in mind. But again, when the delivery is off and it's destructive, even if it's the truth, what's being said, the message gets lost. The person doesn't want to talk about it anymore, right? So you have to be able to, you know, recognize, okay, is what is being said the truth? Or am I just not wanting to admit, you know, I'm wrong, or this needs improvement?
And I think that there are circumstances where it's both, where someone has weaved into their argument truths and non-truths about you. And you need to have the ability to deconstruct that and be like, okay, points 1 through 3, I give you. But points 4 through 6, you're completely off base. And then if it requires a conversation to happen, you do that. And then sometimes, a lot of times, it's not even a conversation to be had. It's just an internal thing you need to do. And be like, you know what? There are 2 or 3 things I need to improve on. Or you know what? Maybe that is something I got to think about in the future. But then with everything else, you discard that and you keep it moving. You know, when it comes in reference to criticism, people will always have something to say. You can do it in the most graceful way possible. You can say it in the nicest way. And chances are that there will be someone who will have something to say, because ego gets in the way. The idea that, you know, it is an actual good idea, and maybe they mentioned something similar to that a long time ago, but it wasn't the time. Or maybe their delivery was so horrible that the message wasn't received. So now they're upset about it and they're in their feelings. Or, you know, there's just people in general that always have something negative to say, because unfortunately they haven't develop the ability to be nice and to be grateful. You know, and when those situations happen, you just gotta, like you said, plow through it, you know, work through it. If there's something that you need to address, you address it. And then there's other things that you really have to dust off your shoulder and keep moving. Don't even think about it. Don't waste time letting it marinate in your heart or in your mind, because then it creates self-doubt in you where there was no need to have that.
Yeah. And it's funny because he talks about the idea of discomfort. And he says, if you are going to be a disruptive thinker, you cannot avoid discomfort, right? And he says, but we can't let the idea of being uncomfortable scare us into running in the other direction. But one of the things he says is that, you know, the discomfort is likely to be temporary. So we shouldn't make permanent decisions because of temporary discomfort. Give it some time. And I like that idea of, you know, being uncomfortable, because again, when you kind of not live in this space, but you know, oftentimes you find yourself being that disruptive thinker. It is uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But a lot of times when you push through with certain things and you stay persistent and motivated and committed, and as believers and as Christians, when you know that this is something God wants you to do and you know God is leading you to make this decision or make these changes, I think that's what gives you the confidence, right? This is not just coming because I want this done. This is not just coming about because I think it's a good idea. I'm actually doing this because I feel led by God to do this and start this and embark on this change or movement or whatever I'm trying to influence, right? It will be uncomfortable, and you can't allow that discomfort to then scare you off into not wanting to continue. It's uncomfortable being in rooms where people are older than you and you're the youngest one with the bright idea, right? It's uncomfortable going against what has been done for so long and bringing your new, fresh perspective on it. It's uncomfortable to change a whole curriculum or change a whole way of doing things, a whole procedure on, how to communicate with certain people, or communicating through emails and texts versus speaking in person, like all of those things. Like, it's uncomfortable, right, to be that individual who causes change. But I think as Christians in, the Christian world, right, whether it's ministry or within your church, when you have the confidence that you know that this is what God is doing and you are that disruptive thinker, you wait for his timing, you wait for his direction, you wait for his guidance. You just don't make decisions based on your temporary emotions, So I think getting over the idea of being uncomfortable, getting over the idea of discomfort is very important, because a lot of times we won't want to do certain things because it's going to be uncomfortable. And sometimes being uncomfortable is okay. And it actually grows you, it matures you, and it gives you different experiences and a greater experience. And sometimes it's just necessary to go through that discomfort and just know it may not be forever. It may just be until everyone is on board, until everyone gets the vision, And a lot of times, personally, when I'm in those moments, I'll look at it as a challenge to, okay, how do I get them to then see it?
Yeah.
How do I get them? They didn't get it the first time. They didn't get it the second time. I know this is what needs to be done. I know this is what God is wanting to, to do, and the direction, I need to let them see it. I need to make them see it. How do I do that? And this causes you to go back, whether it's go back to God and say, God, I know this is what you have me doing. I know this is what you want me to do. They're not getting it right now. How can I show them? How can I, be innovative and show them how this plan works? And I believe God will give you, those ideas and that creativity to be able to do that. But you have to be willing to push through, because eventually they will get it. Yeah. Eventually, the people that may have looked at your thinking or your way of doing something as disruptive or as so out of the box, right? They will see, the results. They will see, okay, this is what you were trying to get at. I understand now. So it's important when you are that individual to make sure everyone understands the vision as well.
No, yeah, I agree with that 100%. And, it's a work in progress. Even like I said earlier today, is a skill that you have to work on and honing in, and, your delivery and your approach and your timing and all of that. And it also takes people to acclimate to what you're saying as well. Sometimes you will strike gold and you said that one thing and everybody agreed with it and boom, moved forward with the idea. And there's other times that it takes a little bit more work. I just think that for the individual who feels like they're a disruptive thinker, you really just have to be patient. Allow grace for other people, allow grace for yourself, allow patience for other people, allow patience for yourself. You have to, it's a work in progress a lot of times, because of the fact that you're coming with such a great idea or such a big idea or such a left field idea that other people weren't thinking about, that it takes time for people to process that, and with that comes the patience and the grace that you need to deliver onto other people as well.
Yeah, so we hope you are encouraged and motivated today to go out there and be a disruptive thinker, right? So this was, again, Disruptive Thinking by T.D. Jakes. It was a pretty good book, so definitely check it out. And we just hope that you got something out of today's conversation, that you'll return, for our next episode. Be sure to subscribe, right? Wherever you listen to your podcast, you can be notified every time we drop a new episode. You can check us out on YouTube as well, on Instagram and Facebook at God Life Culture Podcast, and we will catch you in our next episode.
Yeah, so thank you once again for tuning into the latest episode of the God Life Culture Podcast. It's God Life Culture. Until next time.
See ya.
Bye.